Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm out for a late night walk. It's about 2:40 in the morning, and I woke and couldn't get back to sleep. So I thought I'd go for a wander. It's been raining here, and it's quite chilly out, and brisk and crisp and silent in the neighborhood where I walk. And one of the things on my mind at the moment, which has come up again and again lately, is a particular quality of the deceptive stability and uniformness of identity in language. And part of why this is highlighted for me at the moment is because language inclines us to believe that we know what things and beings and situations are because we have words for them. And this is fundamentally untrue. So that I've often in my videos spoken of the necessity of thinking about identity in a topological fashion, so that we have, for any given identity, whether it's a simple word like world or tree or human, food or dream or awake, the language flattens the actual diversity that is being pointed at, and it flattens it in the domain of identity, but it also makes it point-like in time, so that it's not apparent in the language that identity transforms over time and situationally in very dramatic ways. And these transformations are hidden from us in language. In fact, they are awareness of them, if not completely lost, is profoundly inhibited. And when I say we should think in a topological map about identity, we should realize that there are myriad, endless, in fact infinite, modes of the experiential gestalt of a word pointing at some experience. For example, food. Yes, it's true that all apples seem in thought to be, quote, the same thing, unquote, and they may match up to a degree. This is deceptive because not just because each apple is unique and each situation in which we encounter an apple is unique, but because we are unique. The encounterer, the one, the experiencer, or the group is always not only profoundly unlike the declarative features that come to mind when we use words. It turns out that whatever an apple is in experience depends fundamentally on who is experiencing it, where, under what circumstances, and so on. And all of these features are effectively denied by language, particularly English. there may be some... Now, English supports the possibility of awareness of this, but very few people are concerned enough to pay attention to it. And so we are largely put to sleep, right? We are made into a kind of zombie mind by following along with, oh, I know what that is, therefore I can dismiss it or go to the next thing or whatever from my awareness. When we are truly present and awake, each feature of experience, the uniqueness and depth and infinite relations that are arising in the moment become present in consciousness and available to experience. But our conceptual thought and our cultural thought emphasizes the pretense of static identity over time, situation, and subject. So a topological map, when we think about identity in this way, we realize not only that there are mountains and valleys, and that they have levels, right? There are degrees of presence and departure from presence and awareness in consciousness, thought, and speech. But we realize that each instance of any phenomena we might refer to in language is profoundly unusual, is non-ordinary, fundamentally non-ordinary, and nothing like the point-like dead sameness that we usually experience in thought and awareness when we're thinking conceptually, or when we're thinking linguistically, or logically, or rationally. And there's another problem which I've mentioned recently that has struck me very deeply of late, which is the problem of the inclination to dismiss descriptions and evocations of identity, situations, cause, meaning, and so on, that are untrue. There's this bizarre gravity, and really it's an array of habits in modern thought, and particularly this is more prevalent in males, to believe in the functional completeness of our declarations and models of meaning, value, identity, and so on, that we determine to be untrue. But it turns out that in order to have a resilient and creative and intelligent mind, we must be able to imagine situations which are formally untrue, but give us perspectives that are otherwise unavailable if we are discarding ideas and modes of awareness and perspectives that have been determined to be formally false in some system of thought. One of the best examples is the concepts that are associated with astrology are very profound in terms of what they bring into our awareness and consideration. And it turns out that it doesn't matter if astrology is true-ish or not. And of course astrology isn't a fact because it's a creative art of interpretive schemas much like other divinatory arts such as the tarot or swordies. So it turns out that many of the ideas that we discard because they're untrue are extremely valuable. If one learned the concepts and lexicons of astrology, resisting the urge to determine whether they are true or not, one is then capable of thinking thoughts that without those concepts it is impossible or very unlikely to think. For example, that situations are the progeny of complex relationships of influences over time, and the temporal aspect turns out to be fundamentally important, especially when thinking of topologies, because when thinking of topologies, what we want to think of is a moving topological map whose features are passing by, are in time, are passing by like the line. Imagine a topological map that's being fed into a slot and is emerging from a slot. So it's emerging in front of us from a slot, and the topologies are passing toward us and disappearing into a slot closer to us. So you can imagine mountains, valleys, lakes, rivers, oceans, deserts, and so on, coming out of a slot in front of us, traveling toward us, and passing into a slot nearer to us. And this model allows us to play in the identity landscape of our considerations in a way that's much more similar to what happened in our minds before we were fully enlanguaged and enculturated. The loss of this varied and always transforming landscape perspective on identity is catastrophic to the possibilities of our humanity and intelligence. And so, in anything we can do to restore the innate diversity of referents, that's with a TS, things referred to conceptually or linguistically, will radically improve our capacity for insight, which is the living origin that the relatively dead produce of, quote, knowledge, unquote, the skeletal remains of insight, the structured remains, are the result of. And certainly what we want is insight, novelty, new features of thought, awareness, consideration, and potentials for relation and interaction and discovery, even if those may be built on a foundation that employs knowledge as one of its features. Now I want to illustrate the concept that I'm introducing here in a particular way. The concept that the belief that things that are named the same thing are essentially, mostly, always the same. And before I pick the specific referent that it's my intent to highlight here, I just want to mention that the idea of one day of life, right, it should be immediately clear to us that the degree to which this phrase points at the same thing is minimal. Each day is preceded, we would imagine, by rest, and upon awakening, we find ourselves actually in a new situation that resembles being reborn. The sameness of the days as they pass by, which of course they don't actually pass by, that's just a linguistic trope, is only really there in the sense of our habits of behavior and whether or not we are creatively explorative or we are just semi-mechanically playing out the roles and habits that are familiar or trenchant in our adult experience. If I use the word or the phrase a dream, we think we know what this means. It means an experience that occurs in consciousness, apparently, while we are sleeping. It's very difficult to prove that a dream has taken place, and it's very difficult to prove that it is true that the dream has taken place, or that the dream is a true experience, because it happens in a context of unconsciousness and is fundamentally not directly examinable in any sense that science could get a hold of, for example. And although science is a very valuable and dangerously important way of knowing, the vast dimensions of human thought, consideration, concern, and experience that don't fit in science resemble the vast dimensions of those features of life that don't fit in language. Now, the referent that I'm concerned with this evening is the idea of being human. We think that being human is always the same thing. This cannot be true. Conceptually, most of us usually think that whatever happens at death is the same for everyone. Whether there's nothing after death, or some kind of extended existence, or some kind of transformative experience, or some recapitulation of previous experiences. We think that most of us, most of the time, are trained to think that even whether we know what it is or not, it's the same for everyone. This cannot be true. In the same way that we think that being born as a human is the same thing for everyone, it's blatantly obvious that this is not the case and cannot ever be the case. This propensity of language to normalize and collapse the vast topologies of diverse natures, characters, potentials, and experiences, and referents, is devastating to human intelligence. And it's something we must work together to overcome if we are to have the opportunity to experience most of what it can actually mean to be human, because most of that is in the domain of potential, not in the domain of expression. This normalization in language is devastating and very compelling to a certain aspect or an array of the faculties that the waking mind finds some sort of comfort in, But that comfort turns out to be a library of impoverishments. Of course, it's more comfortable to think we know what things, beings, and causes and situations, quote, are, unquote. But in fact, every moment of our experience is entirely novel, and the portion of it that fits in the normalization schemas of language and common modern thought is so minute as to be trivial to a degree that is, as I said before, catastrophic. But one of the features that gets lost in our point-like common thought and awareness, instead of a moving, transforming topology, is time. Right? And there's lots of different ways that time is lost or discarded. But the point I want to make here is the idea that in different times and situations, what it means to be human can be so different that the idea that we are still regular, normal humans becomes patently false. And it's my experience and thought that the present moment for humans on Earth, and we should imagine this as still being unique in all situations, people, and locations, is fundamentally different from anything we've had modern experience of in our lifetimes. And what I mean by that is that if we imagine time to be something resembling a river that we are traveling along, the features of the river for humans on Earth circa 2023 are so different from the landscape of thought and conception in which our ideas were developed that we would be better off if we were capable of thinking of it according to these transformations and in light of them, rather than thinking of it as an extension of all previous moments of humanity and concepts and language about being human. To such a degree, to such an extreme degree, this difference in the moment now, the character of time now, the character of the situational topologies that our humanity emerges from and is influenced and transformed by, is so different right now that we might be better off thinking, oh my God, we've become something that isn't human. Right? The degree of change is so dramatic that we would be better to think we'd have more opportunities for insight, learning, and intelligence if we were together thinking something so fundamental has changed that we actually no longer know what it means to be human, and in fact, we aren't human anymore. We would need a placeholder for this new thing we have become, and then we would need to carefully, over time, connotate that placeholder so that it had content in consciousness. But I would like to suggest that the transformation in time, situation, temporality, and even biology that we presently experience is so dramatic that we are no longer human. We are something else. And it's very important to be able to think like this, to know when an apple is no longer an apple, when the referents in the lexicon of English fail and are so antiquated that they are fundamentally just wrong, right? They no longer point. So we keep pointing in language at familiar features of experience and identities in the same way we always did, even when those referents have transformed so dramatically that we would be better off inventing a new word and new connotations. And I think that's the situation that we're in as human beings at the moment, even though I still use the old word. And I guess at this point I should do what I'm saying and discard that word and invent a new one. If I were to do that, one of the words I might come up with or offer as a suggestion is somnions. We experience the great sleep of insight and presence to such a degree now that the idea that we're awake when we're awake is wrong. It's not true. Generally speaking, if I generalize over the topology of human beings circa 2023, I would ask that we learn to notice when the nature of time and nature has transformed so dramatically that the words and concepts we have traditionally used to refer to them have become so hidebound that they no longer point in the right way at the referent that we expect them to encompass and deliver to thought. It's my experience that something extremely dramatic, yet invisible to common thought and expectation, is occurring and has occurred, so that the ideas that we traditionally associate with being human only have a very modest explanatory power in the current situation. Now, I wouldn't merely pick the somnions word, and that word essentially means something like sleepers, or those who have become blind, because that's not the only important connotation of the present situation. In the past 200 years, the humans have so transformed the context from which our humanity draws its influences and articulations that whatever it used to mean to be human, it mostly no longer means. New features for which we don't have language are emerging and being embodied and expressed in individual human beings, groups and societies, nations, corporations, and so on. And we are disinclined to modify the language over time. We keep supposing, and we are trained to do this and scripted, we do this habitually, that since we've always, in modern times in English, called humans humans, humans are still the same thing they've always been. This cannot be true, and is less true now than it's ever been in any time of my life. In a way, we're kind of trapped because we generally don't invent new language together when things transform. Similarly, we don't invent new concepts about identity, right? We're still using Aristotelian and Newtonian concepts of identity when, at the very least, we should be using relativistic concepts. We should have imported the central findings of relativity into our thought and discussion and modeling of identity, but this never happened. It often takes hundreds or even thousands of years before transformations in the fundamental understructure of language and conception emerge as transformations in common thought, evaluation, and discussion. And of course, this is unfortunate. We are trained during our enlanguaging and enculturation to subject consciousness to the structured conservations in language and conception that are traditional. But what we should be doing and what we must learn to do together is the opposite of that. We must learn to place our minds and conceptual faculties and perspectivity above the models and language and concepts, and to invent together new language models and concepts that better preserves the transformations over time in culture that we actually experience and that our minds and bodies emerge from moment to moment. There's a phase in childhood and adolescence, there are phases where the children in groups will make up words to indicate not merely ideas that are missing from the lexicon, but even ideas that are too general and pliable, flexible, to always mean the same thing. I recall a specific situation where some young women invented a nonsense word that they used under a wide array of various conditions to playfully indicate the openness of their actual experience and playful relation, not merely with situations that they encountered, but with each other. I may be able to recall this term, but at the moment I can't. Sometimes, and this is more common in adolescence, cohorts will develop something that resembles at least pieces of a private language. And I think this is much more intelligent than what we ordinarily do by collapsing into the traditional models of thought, identification, reference, and description. I want to highlight that I believe our species is in something resembling an interphase, and we're about to face a vast array of devastating upheavals cataclysms and transformations that partly result from our mechanical propensity to devastate the anciently conserved ecologies and living places of Earth. The humans seem to think that we are somehow outside of nature and safe from the repercussions of the damage we therein inflict on moss. This cannot be true. Fundamentally on Earth, one would be better off thinking as if there is only a single animal here, and only a single organism is a better word, a meta-organism that is fundamentally unified in all times and places, such that any egregious damage to that organism's expressions affect all beings, and not just in the present or the future, but even in the past, because certainly our behavior in the present transforms the meaning of all situations in previous time on Earth. I often give the example that if the humans, speaking of them as a generalized cohort, if they do something so incredibly beautiful and heroic and intelligent together, that changes the meaning of sufferings that previously occurred, right? Including wars and devastation. If we are capable, and we are, of doing something so astonishing, so beautiful, so intelligent, that the entire history of life on Earth would be in favor of it, then we have truly changed the meaning of being human. Similarly, the opposite is true. If we do something so egregious and harmful, so violating of the spirit of life on Earth, that similarly changes the meaning of the past and the sacrifices that therein were made in the hope of preserving life on Earth and a future for all beings here. So this again violates our common ideas, right? We think, oh, it's always the same thing to be human. No, it isn't. What being human means depends on how we enact our humanity, and also how we fail to enact it, how we discover it and embody the potentials native to our species, or distort, warp, destroy, or mutilate them. I will keep ringing this bell throughout this talk, the bell of we are no longer humans. We have become something else, and we need to recognize this formally in our thought, language, and experience, because something so fundamental has changed that whatever it once meant to be human, it largely no longer does. And so I would ask that together we recognize this deceptive normalization over time in language and not merely resist it, but step beyond it. Because if we can't do that, we're going to be thinking in ways about identity, our natures, meaning, value, and so on, that are archaic in a very dangerous library of ways. We will also be incapable of modulating our priorities, because we will presume that the priorities are the same as they have always been. And one of the most egregious lies in our common thought about nature is that the goal of nature is survival. And this is a myth imported and distorted from the discoveries of evolutionary biology that didn't begin with Darwin, but began their formalization, perhaps, and their dissemination with Darwin. And unfortunately, as many of us are aware, these ideas were captured, in a sense, by industrial, commodity-based cultures, so that a vast array of deceptions resulted. The goal of life, first of all, is myriad. There are myriad features of goal-like aspects of organisms and ecologies. And survival is not the pinnacle. It's very blatantly obvious that we would be better to select the pinnacle of symbiotic relation, right? Togetherness. We live or die together. And there are many features of the idea of survival of the fittest that are simply wrong. Even though that principle can be evidenced if we modulate our perspective and intentions, the principle isn't to be entirely discarded, but it should definitely be deprecedenced, right, in our thought. The idea of survival of the fittest is an idea based on the primacy of the individual. Right? And of course we have models that include cohorts, but the myth of the individual is one of the devastating fictions that we moderns labor under the delusion of. There are no individuals. There never were. It's a conceptual fiction that arises from peculiar properties of purposive distortion and behavior in human cultures. There's no such thing as an individual because every individual is intimately dependent on billions of other life forms. The entire history of life on Earth, and indeed the future of life, on the nature of time in the biosphere and the transformations of temporalities that occur beyond the purview of our common thought and conception of identity. Time turns out to be a fundamentally crucial element in conception that is mostly discarded, right? All of the Enlightenment traditions ask us to look with eyes that see transformation in precedence to stability, but our language and common thought, habits of thought, do the opposite. They project stability over time in identity. And this deception deprives us of most of the possibilities of actual insight or intelligence. So this is another feature we must learn to introduce. We must see the transformation as having precedence due to the nature of time, rather than the stability. Now, the stability is comforting because it offloads ambiguity and the necessities of vigilance. And this is a feature of modern human activity that is very trenchant and widespread and deeply affecting of our capacities for cognition, and particularly group cognition. everything that is arises, transforms, and departs. Right? Nothing is stable, though in a temporal map, some features have greater stability than others. Cities tend to outlast persons. Right? The constructs of the humans are an attempt to achieve a kind of bizarre and usually dead inside immortality, in the sense of persisting in similar structure over time, and this imperative arises in our language because it has the property of reducing ambiguity and thus reducing vigilance and thus increasing the simplicity and accuracy of predictions. These three features of human concern, vigilance, ambiguity, and prediction, can be found at the root of most of the problems that we're facing. So if we can transform our relationships with them, we have the opportunity to become insightful and intelligent together and to enact the potentials of our humanity that have long lain dormant. So in closing, I just ask us to remember that the referents that our words point at change, and sometimes they change so dramatically that we really need to think in new terms and ways, and maybe even new language. Whatever it means to be human today is not what it meant 20 years ago, or 50 or 100, and it might be so radically different that we're actually no longer human. We are something else. And what that is remains to be determined, not merely in thought, but by our behavior and our sensitivity to the transformations in the world and our cultures and our behaviors that modernity is constantly raining down into us. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon, and I deeply value those of you who listen and consider and share my videos. And please think of supporting me on Patreon. There's a link on my YouTube page. If that's a possibility for you, I'd be very grateful, as all of my recordings are presented without interruption by advertisements. So I depend on my listeners and subscribers for whatever funding you may be willing to contribute. Thank you again. All blessings to you. May your life be beautiful and rich. Bye-bye for now.